Hello, I'm Samuel, 42 years old, a civil engineer living in a quiet corner of Michigan where gravel roads are covered with golden leaves every autumn, and the air carries the faint scent of pine from the nearby forest. Our home is a comfortable two-story house with 3 bedrooms and a lush little garden, a generous wedding gift from my wife's family when we got married 15 years ago. It's not a lavish mansion or anything extravagant, but the pristine white-painted walls, polished wooden floors, and cozy kitchen with a dining table, big enough for the whole family, once made me believe this would be our happy haven forever. Yet amidst that warmth, I can feel the invisible voids, the cracks in our family that I don't know how to mend. Until recently, our family consisted of just me, my wife Laura, and our lovely daughter Tracy, who's in 7th grade. But for the past few months, we've had one more person. My mother, Vanessa, who is bravely battling a cruel heart condition. My father passed away 4 years ago from a stroke. I still remember that day when my mother called, her voice trembling over the phone. "Samuel, your father, he's gone." I rushed to the hospital, but I was only in time to see him lying there, cold and still. Since then, my mother lived alone in her old house in the suburbs, about a 30-minute drive from ours. I visited her often, bringing food or sitting with her over coffee, listening to her stories about the old days, when she and my father were young, when they baked batches of cookies in their small kitchen filled with the aroma of butter and sugar. But recently her health has deteriorated. The doctor said she has heart failure, a condition that makes every heartbeat a battle. I couldn't let her live alone anymore. So I brought her to live with us, hoping to care for her and give her peaceful days with family in her final time. I had envisioned a beautiful scene. My mother sitting in an armchair telling Tracy stories about fishing trips with my father, Laura brewing tea, laughing cheerfully, and me coming home after a long day's work to the smell of delicious food wafting from the kitchen. But reality was far different. Laura, my wife, has never been easygoing, but I didn't expect her to react so harshly to my mother moving in. She didn't say it outright or raise her voice, but her eyes, cold and sharp as a blade, told me she didn't want my mother here. "Your mom's messing everything up," she said one evening as I was clearing the dinner table. My mother, sitting in the living room and staring out the window with weary eyes, must have overheard. I turned to Laura, trying to keep my voice calm. "Honey, Mom's not well. It's just temporary. Please bear with it." Laura only smirked, a sarcastic half-smile, then walked away, leaving me standing there feeling helpless. Things got worse in the days that followed. Laura started making snide remarks as if my mother were an uninvited guest. Once, when my mother accidentally spilled some water on the kitchen floor, Laura stood with her arms crossed, sighing sharply. "Great. More for me to clean up. Thanks a lot." I saw my mother lower her head, her trembling hands wiping the spill with a tissue, murmuring apologies. I stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. "It's okay, Mom. I've got it." But the look in her eyes, full of guilt and hurt, felt like a vice gripping my heart. I pulled Laura aside, trying to keep my voice low. "Honey, she didn't mean it. Please don't make her feel bad." Laura just glared at me, her voice icy. "What, you think I'm the maid in this house? I have my own life, Samuel." Then she walked away, leaving me with a sinking feeling, like I'd been doused with cold water. Tracy, my daughter, was the only bright spot in those gloomy days. She's 13, lanky with messy brown hair, but her heart is bigger than anyone else's in the house. Tracy loves her grandmother and often sits with her, listening to stories about my mother's youth, about the afternoons when my father sang old folk songs while she baked. Once I saw Tracy holding a little notebook, jotting down my mother's cookie recipe, her face beaming. "I'll make these for you, Grandma." My mother smiled, stroking Tracy's hair, but I could see the sorrow in her smile. She knows her health is failing, and every moment with Tracy is a precious gift. But even Tracy wasn't spared from the tension in the house. One afternoon, as I came home from work, I heard Laura's raised voice from the living room. "Tracy, don't you see your grandma's making a mess of the house? Go clean up her pile of books." I walked in to find Tracy standing in the middle of the room, clutching a stack of my mother's old books, her eyes red and teary. My mother sat in her chair, head bowed, silent. "Laura, that's enough," I said, my voice firmer than usual. "Mom didn't do anything wrong. Stop blaming her." Laura looked at me, her eyes challenging. "Oh, so I'm the bad guy now? You always take your mom's side." Tracy, caught in the crossfire between her parents, quietly turned and carried the books to her room. I tried to keep the peace. Every night after Laura went to bed, I sat with my mother, checking if she'd taken her medication on time. I asked about her chest pains, her fatigue, trying to read something in her eyes. "Don't worry, Samuel," she said, her frail hand grasping mine. "I'm fine. Just being near you and Tracy makes me happy." But I knew she wasn't fine. Her dry coughs, the times she had to pause to catch her breath walking from the living room to the kitchen. They all reminded me her time was running out. I just wanted her to live her remaining days in peace, but Laura didn't seem to understand that. One evening, while I was fixing a lamp in the living room, Laura walked in, phone in hand, muttering about her cousin's trip to Florida. "They have a whole villa there, you know," she said, her voice dreamy. "Pool, beach parties all night. Meanwhile, I'm stuck here in this cramped house with your mom." I stopped working, looked at her, and tried to suppress the anger rising in me. "Laura, Mom's not a burden," I said, my voice trembling. "She's family. Don't you see how important that is?" She scoffed, a laugh that made me feel more distant from her than ever. "Family? You think I want to spend my life taking care of a sick old lady? I have my own life, Samuel." I didn't respond right away. I just looked at her, searching for a trace of the woman I once loved, the one who stood with me before a priest, vowing to face all hardships together. But all I saw was selfishness, raw and unmasked. I turned back to fixing the lamp, but inside a storm was brewing. I knew if I didn't do something, things would only get worse. But I wasn't ready to confront it. Not yet. The tension in the house grew thicker in the following days, like a dark cloud hanging overhead, waiting for a storm to break. Laura stopped hiding her frustration. She began ignoring my mother, not responding when asked something, or worse, replying with short, cutting remarks. Once, when my mother asked her to grab a box of medication from a high shelf, Laura just said, "In a minute," and kept scrolling on her phone. Tracy, standing nearby, quietly fetched the medication for her grandmother, her eyes full of indignation. I wanted to say something, to yell that Laura was treating my mother like an unwanted burden, but I was afraid that a big fight would shatter the little peace left in our home. My mother, despite her frail body, tried to blend into the family's rhythm. She brought an old wooden box containing yellowed photos, small keepsakes, and a notebook filled with recipes written in her soft, flowing handwriting. One quiet afternoon, she called Tracy and me into her room, placed the box on the bed, and carefully opened it. She took out each photo, telling us the stories behind them. There was one of me as a toddler, wobbling across a grassy yard, another of me and my father by a lake, holding fishing rods, grinning brightly, and one of our whole family in the little kitchen, faces smudged with flour as we baked. Tracy listened eagerly to every story, her eyes wide, giggling. But I noticed the sadness in my mother's eyes, as if she knew she didn't have much time left with us. I took her hand, forcing a smile. "Mom, this weekend we'll bake together, the whole family, okay?" She nodded, but I knew she didn't believe in that whole family vision. Laura wouldn't join. She never had. One night, as I was reviewing my work schedule, Laura came into the room, her voice unusually sweet. "Samuel, my mom invited us over for dinner this Sunday. Can you make it?" I looked at her, surprised by the sudden change. "Sure," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "Can Mom come along?" Laura paused, the smile on her face stiffening. "No. Your mom should stay home. She's not well. Why tire her out?" I wanted to argue, but Laura had already turned away, leaving me with an uneasy feeling. I began to realize that Laura wasn't just annoyed with my mother, she was trying to push her out of our lives. That night, as I lay in bed listening to my mother's dry cough from the next room, I couldn't sleep. I thought of my father, of the days he and my mother held hands, of how they built a family on love and sacrifice. I thought of Laura, of the years we were happy, and wondered what had changed her. Or had she always been this way and I was only now seeing it? I thought of Tracy, of the look in her eyes when she defended her grandmother, and I knew I had to do something. But I didn't know where to start. The storm in my heart was still simmering, waiting for a spark to ignite, and I had a feeling that spark would come sooner than I thought. A week later, work called me to a construction site in Ohio, over 300 miles from home. It was a major project, a commercial complex that my company had been bidding on for a year. I didn't want to go, not because of the job, but because of my mother. Her chest pains had become more frequent lately, sometimes forcing her to sit down, clutching her chest, gasping for breath. But I had no choice. If I refused this business trip, I could lose a chance for a promotion. And with our current financial situation, my mother's medical bills, Tracy's school fees, and the daily expenses Laura kept demanding, I couldn't take the risk. The night before I left, I sat down at the dining table with Laura, trying to talk calmly. Our two-story house, with its white walls and warm yellow lamplight, should have felt safe. But that evening, it only felt stifling. Tracy had gone to bed, and my mother was resting in the living room where the old armchair had become her main refuge. I looked at Laura, searching for some reassurance in her eyes, but she was engrossed in her phone, her fingers scrolling quickly through pictures of beaches and villas from her cousins in Florida. "Laura," I began, my voice gentle but cautious, "I'll be gone for 5 days. Please take good care of Mom while I'm away, okay? Her medications are on the kitchen shelf, and I've posted the schedule for when she needs to take them. If anything seems off, call Dr. Harris right away. His number's in the notebook." I paused, waiting for a response. Laura looked up, her eyes indifferent. "Yeah, okay," she said, her tone as casual as if I'd asked her to water the plants. "I know what to do." But her apathy made my heart clench. I wanted to say more, to stress that my mother wasn't just a responsibility but family, my flesh and blood, but I was afraid that another argument would only make things worse. "Thank you," I said, though I felt no gratitude. The next morning, I woke up when the sky was still misty and the small garden in front of our house was damp with dew. I went to the living room and found my mother already awake, sitting in her chair, holding an old book she'd read countless times. "I'm heading out, Mom," I said, leaning down to kiss her forehead. She smiled, but I saw the worry in her eyes. "Be careful, Samuel," she said, her voice frail. "I'm fine, don't worry." I nodded, but as I left the house, I couldn't shake a gnawing sense of unease. I looked back at Laura, standing in the kitchen doorway, holding a coffee mug, her expression blank. "Take good care of Mom, Laura," I repeated, my voice almost pleading. She just nodded, saying nothing. The business trip started with hectic days. I worked from early morning to late at night, reviewing blueprints, meeting with contractors, and resolving issues at the site. But my mind wasn't fully there. I often called home, asking Tracy about my mother, whether she was taking her medication on time, whether she was eating properly. Tracy always answered cheerfully, "Grandma's fine, Dad. Today we made cookies, but we burned a batch." She laughed, and I tried to laugh along, but I knew she was trying to reassure me. I didn't call Laura. I was afraid of hearing her voice, afraid of her lies or familiar indifference. On the 4th day, while I was eating a quick lunch at a diner near the site, my phone buzzed. Tracy's name appeared on the screen, and my heart pounded. She rarely called during the day. She knew I was busy. I answered, trying to keep my voice calm. "Tracy, what's wrong?" Her voice on the other end was shaky, panicked, unlike the cheerful girl I usually heard. "Dad, Grandma. She had a heart attack. I called an ambulance and they took her to the hospital. Can you come home now?" I felt the blood in my veins turn to ice. "I'm coming, sweetheart. Where are you? Where's Mom?" Tracy sobbed, her voice breaking. "Mom's not home, Dad. She went somewhere. She left a note telling me to take care of Grandma. I don't remember what I said next. I only remember standing up abruptly, knocking over a glass of water and running to my car. A note? Where had Laura gone? I called her, but the phone rang and went to voicemail. I called again and again, but there was no answer. I called the hospital, confirming that my mother had been taken to the ER. The nurse on the line said she was being monitored but was unstable. "Are you family? You should come immediately," she said, her calm tone only heightening my fear. I cut the trip short, abandoning meetings and ignoring the annoyed looks from colleagues. I drove for over 5 hours, speeding down endless highways, my mind in chaos. My mother was in the hospital, alone except for Tracy. And Laura, my wife, whom I had begged to care for my mother, had left. The note Tracy mentioned haunted me. What was it? An explanation? An apology? Or just another proof of her selfishness? I didn't know, but with every turn of the wheels bringing me closer to Michigan, I felt the storm in my heart ready to erupt. When I reached the hospital, it was already dark. I ran to the ER, finding Tracy curled up in a chair in the hallway, her face pale, her eyes red and swollen. She hugged me the moment she saw me, sobbing, "Dad, I was so scared, Grandma." She had chest pain, then she collapsed. I didn't know what to do. I held Tracy tightly, trying to stay calm despite the tearing in my chest. "You did great, Tracy. I'm here now. Grandma will be okay." But I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure of anything anymore. Dr. Harris, who had been monitoring my mother for a long time, came out of the ER. He looked at me, his expression grave. "Samuel, your mother had an acute heart attack. We've stabilized her condition, but she needs close monitoring. Things don't look promising." I nodded, feeling like a boulder was crushing my chest. "Can I see her?" I asked. He nodded and led me inside. My mother lay there on the hospital bed, surrounded by IV lines and machines. She looked smaller than ever, her eyes closed, her breathing faint. I took her hand, feeling her thin, cold fingers. "Mom, it's me," I whispered. "I won't leave you alone." She opened her eyes slightly, giving a weak smile. "Samuel, where's Tracy?" she asked, her voice barely a breath. "She's fine, Mom. She's outside. Rest now. I'll stay with you." When I returned to the hallway, Tracy handed me an envelope, her hands trembling. "This is what Mom left, Dad," she said. I opened the note, and Laura's words cut into my heart like a knife. "Samuel, I need some time to relax. I'm going to Florida with my mom and cousins. Tracy's old enough to take care of your mother. Don't call. I'll be back in a few days." No apology, no concern for my mother, no sign of care. Just cold, blatant selfishness, as if my mother and Tracy were mere obstacles in her life. I crumpled the note, anger surging like a wildfire. Laura hadn't just abandoned my mother, she had abandoned Tracy, our 13-year-old daughter, leaving her alone to face a crisis. I wanted to call Laura right then, to scream into the phone, to demand an explanation. But I knew that whatever she said, it couldn't erase this betrayal. Tracy looked up at me, her big brown eyes now red, shimmering with a mix of fear and a fierce determination I'd never seen in her before. She bit her lip, as if struggling to find words, then her trembling but resolute voice broke the silence of the hospital hallway. "Dad, Mom's been really mean to Grandma," Tracy said, each word like a blade carving into my heart. "She's always annoyed, always saying unkind things about her. The night you left for your trip, during dinner, Grandma was eating slowly, her hands shaking, and she dropped some rice on the table. 'Mom!' she yelled at her, saying, 'Who can stand eating like that?' Grandma just bowed her head, not saying anything, but I saw her eyes turn red. I wanted to say something, but Mom glared at me, telling me to shut up. Tracy paused, taking a deep breath, tears streaming down her cheeks. I reminded Mom that Grandma needed to take her medication on time, but she just snapped, 'Let her handle it herself, I'm not her maid.' I stood there, stunned, feeling like the hospital floor was crumbling beneath me. The image of my mother, the woman who held me as a child, taught me to tie my shoes and sang me lullabies, being yelled at for trembling and dropping a few grains of rice, crushed my heart. I looked at Tracy, my 13-year-old daughter, small but strong, trying to protect her grandmother by telling me this painful truth. "I tried, Dad," Tracy whispered, her voice choking. "I got her medication, reminded her to take it, but she's so sad. She told me she doesn't want to be a burden." The word burden cut like a sharp blade. My mother, who had sacrificed her life for me, now felt like a burden in the home I called our sanctuary. I pulled Tracy into my arms, holding her tightly, feeling her small body tremble with emotions too big for her age. "You did amazing, Tracy," I said, my voice hoarse as I fought back tears. "You're the bravest girl I know. I'm so proud of you." But inside, my anger blazed like a fire, burning away any lingering hope for Laura. She wasn't just selfish or indifferent. She had hurt my mother, who was fighting a cruel illness every day. And she had left Tracy, our daughter, alone to face fear. Laura didn't deserve to be part of this family, didn't deserve Tracy's love, and certainly didn't deserve the years I'd spent trying to save our marriage. That night, I sat by my mother's bedside, holding her hand, listening to the steady beeps of the heart monitor. Tracy curled up in a chair, asleep from exhaustion. I looked at Laura's crumpled note in my hand, feeling like a part of me had shattered. I thought about our years of marriage, the times I tried to please Laura, the times I turned a blind eye to her selfishness to keep the peace. But now, I could no longer look away. The storm in my heart had erupted, and I knew that when Laura returned, nothing would ever be the same. The hours that followed in the hospital passed like a slow nightmare. My mother woke up a few times, but she was so weak she could only manage a few words before slipping back into sleep. Dr. Harris came to check on her, his expression as grave as before. "Samuel, we're doing everything we can," he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "But your mother's heart is very weak. You need to prepare yourself." I nodded, but inside I refused to accept it. My mother couldn't leave me. Couldn't leave Tracy, not now when everything was in such chaos. Tracy woke up around midnight, rubbing her eyes, then quietly sat beside me. "Will Grandma be okay, Dad?" she asked, her voice barely audible. I stroked her hair, forcing a smile despite the weight in my chest. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I'll do everything to make sure she gets the best care." Tracy nodded, but I could see the worry in her eyes. She didn't say anything more, just held my hand, and we sat there in the dim light of the hospital room waiting for a miracle. The next morning, I decided to call Laura. I needed an explanation, even though I knew it wouldn't change anything. I stepped into the hallway, avoiding the curious glances of the nurses, and opened FaceTime. The phone rang for a long time before Laura answered. Her face appeared on the screen, lounging by a pool, the bright Florida sun glinting off her blonde hair. She wore a vibrant floral dress, holding a cocktail, and the smile on her face felt like a slap. "Samuel, why are you calling so urgently?" she said, her tone light but laced with disdain. "I'm busy relaxing here." "Relaxing?" I repeated, my voice trembling with anger. "Laura, my mother's in the hospital, nearly died from a heart attack. Tracy had to call an ambulance alone, terrified, and you're off on vacation? What's that note you left? You left our daughter to take care of my mother by herself?" Laura raised an eyebrow, showing no remorse. "Oh, don't blow it out of proportion, Samuel. Tracy's old enough to handle things. And your mother, she's always exaggerating her condition. She's just a burden, don't you see? I needed time for myself, and I deserve it." She took a sip of her cocktail as if we were discussing the weather. I felt the blood rush to my head. "A burden? Laura, my mother's fighting to stay alive. You yelled at her for dropping rice. You ignored her when she needed her medication, and you took money from our joint account for this lavish trip, didn't you?" I was almost shouting, but tried to keep my voice down to avoid disturbing those around me. Laura smirked, her eyes cold and sharp. "Oh, you found out about the money?" "Yes, I took it. It's our money, Samuel, and I have a right to use it. As for your mother, if she weren't there, our lives would be so much easier. What are you going to do about it? Divorce me? You don't have the guts." She tilted her head, her smug smile making me want to smash the phone. I took a deep breath, trying to keep myself from breaking down. Laura, you're wrong. I don't just have the guts, I'm going to do it. You don't deserve to be my wife, and you don't deserve to be Tracy's mother. When you get back, we'll talk to a lawyer. I ended the FaceTime call before she could respond, my heart pounding, but not from fear, from a strange sense of liberation. I had finally said what I'd been holding back for too long. This marriage had been dead for years, and I could no longer pretend otherwise. When I returned to the hospital room, my mother was awake, her eyes a bit brighter. Tracy was sitting beside her, holding her hand, telling a story about a stray cat she'd seen at school. My mother smiled, though it was weak. I sat down beside her, relieved to see her alert. "Samuel," she called, her voice hoarse. "Come here, I need to tell you something." I pulled my chair closer, taking her hand. She looked at me, her eyes full of love but also determination. "Son, I know I don't have much time left," she said, and I tried to interrupt, but she raised a hand to stop me. "Listen to me. I bought a life insurance policy years ago when your father was still alive. If I pass, you'll receive about $1 million. The policy is in my suitcase with my clothes. I want you and Tracy to have a stable future, to not worry about money." I was stunned, unable to believe what I'd just heard. "Mom, why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, my voice choking. She smiled, her hand gently squeezing mine. "I didn't want you to think I was planning for my death. I just wanted you to know I've always thought of you and Tracy. Whatever happens, you two will be okay." Tracy, sitting nearby, had tears in her eyes. "Grandma, don't say that," she said, her voice trembling. "You have to get better. You have to make cookies with me again." My mother stroked Tracy's hair, her eyes gentle but full of sorrow. "I'll try, my love. But if I can't, you have to promise me you'll take care of your dad, okay?" Tracy nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. The days that followed were spent entirely by my mother's side. I adjusted her pillows, read chapters from her favorite old novel, and brought her the dishes she used to make with my father. Though even a simple bowl of soup, I tried to make it the way she did. Tracy was there too, carrying her little notebook with Grandma's cookie recipes, sometimes telling silly stories to make her laugh. Those moments, however brief, were the only medicine that helped me push through the anger and pain caused by Laura. One afternoon, when Tracy stepped out to buy water, my mother pulled me close. "Samuel," she said, her voice weak but firm, "you have to be strong, not for me, but for Tracy. She needs you, and you. You have to live for yourself, not for Laura." I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "I know, Mom, I'll do it." She smiled, and for the first time in days, I saw peace in her eyes. But that peace didn't last. That night, my mother's condition suddenly worsened. The machines started beeping erratically, and nurses rushed into the room. I stood there, holding Tracy's hand, watching them try to save her. But deep down, I knew my mother was ready to go. When Dr. Harris came out, his eyes said it all. "Samuel, I'm so sorry," he said. "We did everything we could." My mother passed away peacefully with Tracy and me by her side. I held Tracy as she sobbed in my arms while I silently looked at my mother, feeling a part of my heart leave with her. I arranged a simple but dignified funeral for her in a small Michigan church where she and my father used to attend every Sunday. Neighbors and old friends of my mother came, bringing flowers and condolences. But not a single member of Laura's family showed up. I wasn't surprised, but their absence only solidified my resolve. When I returned home after the funeral, the comfortable house with its white walls and small garden felt empty, as if its soul had left with my mother. I sat in her old armchair where she used to sit and look out at the garden, holding the worn wooden box she brought when she moved in. The box, weathered with scratches that told the story of time, was something she always kept close, like a small treasure chest holding her entire life. I opened the lid, and the smell of old wood and faded paper hit me, carrying memories of the days when my mother still smiled brightly beside my father. Inside were family photos, me as a child holding my parents' hands at a picnic, Tracy as a newborn in my mother's arms, and simple keepsakes, a silver bracelet she used to wear, an old badge of my father's. I flipped through the pages of the recipe notebook she and Tracy loved, smelling the aged paper, and felt as though she was still here somehow in the trembling handwriting of her words. Then I stood up and went to my mother's room where her old suitcase still sat neatly under the bed. I pulled it out, opened the latch, and immediately a wave of memories flooded over me as her familiar scent, a faint lavender perfume mixed with the gentle smell of her, wafted from the carefully folded clothes. I lifted a soft green sweater, the kind she wore on cool afternoons, pressed it to my face, and breathed deeply, as if I could hold on to her a little longer through that scent. These clothes, her simple cotton dresses, the shawl she draped over her shoulders while reading, were the last pieces of her in this house. I ran my fingers over the fabric, feeling as if I were touching the days when she was still here, still smiling at me and Tracy. Then at the bottom of the suitcase I found it, a pale yellow envelope carefully placed beneath a floral embroidered handkerchief she loved. In her shaky handwriting it read, "For Samuel." My heart pounded as I opened it, and inside was the life insurance policy she had mentioned in the hospital before she passed. The dry pages listed the terms, but what choked me up was a small handwritten note tucked inside. "Samuel, I'm leaving this for you and Tracy. Use it to live a life where you don't have to fear or depend on anyone. I believe in you. Love, my little boy." My eyes blurred with tears, not because of the policy's value, but because of my mother's love, wrapped in every shaky letter, in the quiet decision she made to protect Tracy and me, even when she knew her time was short. I sat there on the floor of her room, one hand clutching the sweater, the other gripping the envelope, tears streaming down my face. My mother had always thought of me, of Tracy, even when she was at her weakest, when she was treated like a burden in this very house. Her scent from the sweater was a reminder that, though she was gone, her love remained, forever. I knew Laura would soon return from her trip, and I knew that when she walked through that door, I wouldn't just confront her, I would confront my and Tracy's future. My mother had left me not just a fortune, but a lesson. Family is about those who love and sacrifice for each other, not those who demand and abandon. I wouldn't let Laura keep hurting Tracy, and I wouldn't let my mother's memory be disrespected any further. I began preparing for the confrontation with Laura. I contacted a lawyer, David Coleman, an old friend of my father's, to start the divorce proceedings. As I shared my story, Mr. Coleman listened, his voice calm but resolute. "Samuel, you have enough evidence to prove Laura's irresponsibility. How do you want to handle the division of assets and custody?" I told him I wanted Tracy to stay with me, and I didn't want Laura to take anything that belonged to my mother, not even her memory. He nodded, jotting down notes, and promised to prepare the paperwork within a few days. Laura returned on a Wednesday afternoon while Tracy and I were quietly eating a simple meal at the dining table, just soup and bread. But I tried to make the soup the way my mother used to, with a touch of parsley and cream. The sound of the door unlocking echoed, and Laura walked in, pulling a suitcase behind her. She wore a vibrant floral dress, sunglasses perched on her head, and a smug smile that made my heart clench. "Hey everyone," she said, her tone carefree as if she'd only been out shopping for a few hours. "Florida was amazing, you wouldn't believe it." I set my spoon down, looking straight at her. Tracy sat beside me, her hands gripping the edge of the table, her eyes cold, far from the timid girl I once knew. "Laura," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Sit down. We need to talk." Laura raised an eyebrow, tossed her suitcase aside, and sat across from me, legs crossed, her gaze defiant. "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Samuel. Is your mom okay? Or is she making a big deal out of things as usual?" She smirked, and I felt the blood rush to my head. Tracy squeezed my hand under the table as if reminding me to stay calm. "My mother passed away," I said, my voice steady but icy. "She died 3 days ago after a heart attack that you left Tracy to deal with alone. You went to Florida, leaving our daughter and my mother behind with a note asking a 13-year-old to care for a critically ill woman. You call that relaxing? Laura blinked, but there was no trace of remorse in her eyes. Oh, you're making me sound like the villain, she replied, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Samuel, I needed time for myself. You know how stressed I've been. And your mother, she was old. Sickness is normal. I couldn't stay here playing nurse forever. She shrugged, as if my mother's death was a minor inconvenience. I slid her note across the table, its cold words now like an indictment. You wrote this, Laura. You abandoned Tracy, abandoned my mother, and you withdrew money from our joint account to fund your lavish trip. Did you think I'd forgive that? Laura glanced at the note, then laughed, a sharp, cutting sound. So what are you going to do, Samuel? Divorce me? You don't have the money to fight me. My family will hire the best lawyers, and you'll lose everything, even Tracy. She leaned forward, her eyes challenging. You're just an ordinary engineer. You think you can beat me? I took a deep breath, trying to suppress my anger to avoid shouting. Laura, you're wrong. I'm not just divorcing you. I'll make sure you pay for what you've done. I have this note, the recording of our FaceTime call, and Tracy's testimony about how you treated my mother. You yelled at her for dropping rice, ignored her when she needed her medication, and left our daughter alone in a hospital. You don't deserve to be Tracy's mother, and you're no longer my family. Laura opened her mouth to respond, but Tracy suddenly stood up, her hands clenched, her voice trembling but resolute. Mom, you're wrong, Tracy said, her eyes locked on Laura. Grandma wasn't a burden. She loved me, loved Dad, and she always thought of us. She left us $1 million from her life insurance. You don't get anything because she knew you didn't deserve it. Tracy paused, tears streaming down her cheeks, but she didn't look away. You left me alone when Grandma needed me most. I won't forgive you. Laura froze, her face paling, her smug smile vanishing. $1 million? She repeated, her voice faltering. No, that's impossible. That old woman didn't have any money. She looked at me, her eyes frantic. Samuel, you're making this up, right? Your family was dirt poor. How could she have that kind of money? I stood up, took the yellow envelope from my mother's wooden box and placed it on the table in front of Laura. This is the insurance policy. My mother bought it years ago because she knew you couldn't be trusted. She wanted Tracy and me to have a secure future, free from your manipulation. You can check it. It's legal, and you have no claim to it. Laura opened the envelope, flipping through the pages, her eyes shifting from doubt to panic. Then, as if realizing she'd lost everything, she changed her tone. She stood up, stepped closer to me, her voice suddenly soft, almost pleading. Samuel, you can't do this. I was wrong. I'm sorry. I'll change. I promise. We're a family. You can't just leave me like this. Give me a chance. She reached for my hand, but I pulled back, feeling as if I'd touched something cold and foreign. Laura, I said, my voice resolute. You had your chance. You chose to abandon my mother when she needed you most. You chose to abandon Tracy, our daughter. Now I'm choosing to protect her and my mother's memory. I've already contacted a lawyer. We're getting divorced. Laura stepped back, her face contorting, the last traces of arrogance fading in that brief moment. Then, as if reclaiming her smugness, she sneered, her eyes cold. Then get out. You and Tracy, get out of here right now. She pointed at the door, her voice rising to a furious scream. You think you can threaten me with a lawyer? You won't get away with this, and you, she turned to Tracy, you'll regret turning your back on your mother. Tracy stood tall, her hands clenched, her eyes unwavering. I don't need you, she said, her voice quiet but firm like a declaration. I have Dad, and I have Grandma in my heart. Laura froze, her face paling further, but she said nothing more. She turned, dragged her suitcase into the master bedroom, and left Tracy and me standing in the living room, in the house that was once our home. But we were ready. In the days following my mother's funeral, Tracy and I had quietly packed our belongings. Things that truly belonged to us, things that carried my mother's memory. The old wooden box with family photos, the recipe notebook, and the suitcase filled with clothes still scented with her lavender perfume were neatly packed in the car. I looked at Tracy, seeing the resilience in her eyes, and I knew we no longer belonged here. "Let's go, sweetheart," I said, placing a hand on her shoulder. She nodded, clutching my mother's soft green sweater like a talisman. We drove to my mother's old house in the suburbs, a 30-minute drive away, where I grew up amid afternoons filled with laughter and the smell of fresh-baked cookies. The small house, with its faded tile roof and rickety wooden fence, wasn't as grand as Laura's. When I opened the door, a wave of musty air and dust hit me. Months of neglect had left the house forgotten. Cobwebs clung to corners, dust coated the furniture, and the smell of damp wood from the old floors tugged at my heart. But this was my mother's place, where she lived, loved, and I was determined to bring it back to life for Tracy and me. Tracy stepped inside, clutching my mother's green sweater, and placed it on the familiar armchair, now covered in a thin layer of dust. She looked around, her brown eyes sparkling but tinged with sadness. "Dad, Grandma would be happy to see us here, right?" she asked, her voice small but hopeful. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "Yes, sweetheart, she'd be thrilled. And we'll make this house as beautiful as she did." I hugged Tracy, feeling her small body no longer trembling with fear but with a deep sense of release, a new beginning. We started cleaning that afternoon. I opened the windows wide, letting the autumn sunlight stream in, chasing away the musty smell. Tracy grabbed a broom, sweeping dust from the floor, humming a song my mother used to sing to her. I wiped down the dining table where my mother once sat writing her cookie recipes, feeling the wood as if it carried her memory. We found a few of her old things in a cupboard. A ceramic vase she loved, a silver picture frame with a photo of our family from when I was young. Each item was a reminder that though she was gone, her love lingered in every corner of this house. As the sunset fell, Tracy and I began fixing small details. I replaced a burnt-out light bulb, repaired a creaky door while Tracy carefully cleaned the window frames, revealing clear panes that looked out onto a garden now overgrown with weeds. "Dad, we'll plant flowers again, right?" she asked, still holding her rag, her eyes bright with the idea. "Yes," I replied, smiling. "We'll plant lavender like Mom loved." Tracy nodded, her smile like sunlight breaking through the darkness in my heart. That night, after cleaning, Tracy and I sat in my mother's armchair, opening the recipe notebook. We read her shaky handwriting, laughing as we recalled the batches of burnt cookies Tracy made with her. I draped my mother's green sweater over Tracy's shoulders, and the faint lavender scent, though faded, felt like it was embracing us once more. Laura could keep the grand house her parents gave us, but she couldn't take what my mother left us. Not just the insurance money, but the love, sacrifice, and lesson about the true meaning of family. This house, though old and dusty, would be where Tracy and I rebuilt our lives, step by step, guided by my mother's memory. 3 months later, I finalized the divorce with Laura. I gained custody of Tracy while Laura kept the house. That was exactly what I had planned. After the divorce, I used a portion of the $1 million from the insurance to renovate my mother's old house, not to turn it into something lavish, but to make it a true home. I replaced the roof tiles to stop the leaks during rain, installed a new heating system to keep the winters warm, and turned my mother's small room into a little library where Tracy and I placed her favorite books and the wooden box filled with memories. I painted Tracy's room a soft green, her grandmother's favorite color, and hung a large photo of my mother taken when she was young, standing beside my father, smiling radiantly under a sunset. A significant portion of the money went into a college fund for Tracy. I wanted her to have the chance to pursue her dreams, whether that meant becoming a doctor, an artist, or anything else she chose. "I'll study hard, Dad," Tracy said one evening as we sat down to dinner in the now clean and cozy kitchen. "I want to make Grandma proud." I stroked her hair, smiling. "You've already made her proud, Tracy, and I'm proud of you too." I also set aside a portion of the money to donate to an organization supporting elderly people with heart conditions, a way to honor my mother's legacy. I contacted the organization telling them about her, a strong woman who sacrificed her life for her family and even in her final days thought of her son and granddaughter's future. They were touched, and I felt a sense of relief knowing that my mother's legacy lived on not just in Tracy and me, but in those helped through her. Our life, Tracy's and mine, wasn't perfect, but it was filled with love and meaning. We baked cookies together using my mother's recipes, though our first batches still burned, just like the ones Tracy made with her grandmother. We laughed, wiping flour off each other's faces, and felt my mother's presence somewhere in the buttery, sugary scent wafting through the kitchen. Tracy returned to school wearing her grandmother's soft green sweater on chilly days, as if it were a talisman. She told me about her new friends, the math test she aced, and her dream of becoming a writer to tell stories about her grandmother. I also found the strength to live for myself. I continued my engineering work, but now with a clearer purpose, building not just structures but a future for Tracy. I started keeping a journal, writing down memories of my mother, my father, and the days Tracy and I overcame our pain together. Some nights I sat in my mother's armchair reading her recipe notebook, feeling as though she was still talking to me, reminding me that family is about those who love each other unconditionally. Laura never reached out again. Neither did I. One spring morning, as the lavender in the garden began to bloom, Tracy and I stood outside watching the purple flowers sway in the breeze. Tracy held my hand, her eyes shining like the sunlight. "Dad, I think Grandma's watching us," she said. I smiled, breathing in the faint lavender scent like an embrace from my mother. "I think so too, sweetheart," I replied, and we stood there under the gentle sunlight, knowing that no matter how tough things got, we would always have each other, and my mother forever in our hearts.